Hello Bumblebee folks, I'm glad y'all liked me enough to have you back. Isn't weird history just fascinating? I'm the resident emo gal, Alexa, here to have some fun today with filthy history. While one's mind might jump to filthy as simply dirty, it could also represent scandalous, naughty, or forbidden, and I'm here to cover all of the above. I hope you're ready, because it's time to dive into the top 10 filthy secrets of the Dark Ages uncovered. Kicking off our list in 10th place, we have a very weird dish. Thanks to a lexicon of interweb no-no words, I can't say the explicit name, so you'll have to pay very close attention to what I'm spelling out. As far back as history can go, food has been used for sustenance and entertainment. For many of us, we can't be content with the exact same thing every day. We'd grow sick of it, or even run out of a certain thing, making that unrealistic. Heck, we wouldn't have a cookbook industry if people didn't constantly want to change up their meals. Now back in the Dark Ages, people had to get creative with what they had, since importing and exporting goods from other countries was nowhere near what it is today. Coming up with a delicacy they called helmeted, naughty name for rooster that is also used for a phallus? Work with me here. This was done by stitching a rooster so it seemed to be riding atop a pig, with military regalia serving as decorative garnish. I'll stick with herbs for garnishing my meat. Thanks! In 9th place, time to talk about gargoyles. Not to go all hunchback on y'all, but they serve as more than just fascinating architecture. Sadly, they don't sing or talk as far as we know, but there's always hope they just keep it a secret. The term gargoyle comes from the French gargouille, which is the noise of both water and air mixing in the throat. In English, we know this as gargle. Gargoyles were originally designed in 13th century French architecture as a means of disposing of water. Think of them like the precursor to the gutter. Typically, a trough was cut into the back of the gargoyle, and rainwater was able to run off the roof and through the gargoyle's mouth. The longer the body of the gargoyle, the further the water was projected. This prevented water from running down the walls and causing damage to the buildings. I'm glad modern plumbing is a lot more progressive, since that could have definitely been brutal. However, some gargoyles had another function, warding off evil spirits outside of churches and cathedrals. According to French legend, Saint Romanus saved his country from a dragon named La Gargouille. After defeating the creature, Saint Romanus burned its body. However, since the dragon had possessed the ability to, breathe fire, its head and neck could not be burned. Therefore, they mounted La Gargouille's head on the wall of a church and used it to scare off harmful spirits. Most gargoyles are depicted as grotesque creatures, but it is said that, like snowflakes, you will never find two that are exactly alike. Feel free to travel the world and compare the ones that are still standing. I'll wait. In 8th place, we have Animal Court. Yep, Fido and Mittens could be dragged in front of a criminal court back in the day if they didn't follow animal law. There are records of at least 85 animal trials that took place during the Dark Ages, and the tales vary from the tragic to the absurd. By far the most serial offenders were pigs, accused and convicted of chewing off body parts and even eating tiny humans. Most were found guilty and sentenced to the rope necklace or being burned at the stake. In 1386, a convicted pig was dressed in a waistcoat, gloves, drawers, and a human mask for its execution. It wasn't just pigs that felt the hand of the law, though. In 1474, a court found a rooster guilty of the unnatural crime of laying an egg. Unwanted rats often found themselves on the receiving end of a strongly worded letter asking them to leave the premises, and curiously enough, there was a trial of dolphins in Marseille in 1596. Okay. However, not all of the trials ended in brutality. One donkey, which found herself the victim of unwanted advances, was proclaimed innocent after a strong recommendation from a convent's prior, declaring her to be a virtuous and well-behaved animal. If anyone wants to hold court for modern dogs that chew up furniture, be my guest. Not much surprises me anymore. In 7th place, we have the origin of nursery rhymes. I thought this one was common knowledge, but after talking with colleagues and friends, enough people didn't know about just how dark nursery rhymes can be, so ergo, this entry. Alrighty, hands up, who has sung Ring Around the Rosie? If you forget, we shall sing it together. Trust me, I've got this thing memorized thanks to my work in children's entertainment, so here goes. Ring around the rosy, pocket full of posies, ashes, ashes, we all fall down. Now let's break this down, shall we? Yeah, I know, I should be tried for my puns. A ring around a rosy is a rash, which is the sign of a plague. A pocket full of posies is to ward off the smell, and ashes are from burning bodies. Sure, children's fun. I've sang a version that continued to add on to the lyrics, going, skipping and singing, having lots of fun, laughing, running underneath the sun. And while I commend the attempt to try and make it more cheerful, personally it just felt a lot more demented. Another dark one is the classic London Bridge is Falling Down. No, don't worry, I'm not gonna sing again. I know, it's bad. It's a traditional English nursery rhyme and singing game about the dilapidation of London Bridge and attempts to repair it back in the Dark Ages. It dates back to bridge-related rhymes and games of that time. A well-known hypothesis is that the song refers to the burying, perhaps alive, of bodies in the foundations of the bridge. This theory was based on the idea that a bridge would collapse unless the body of a human sacrifice was buried in its foundations, and that the watchman is actually the human sacrifice who will then watch over the bridge. Oh, that sounds too far-fetched? Bodies were found beneath London Bridge in 2007 while building work was being carried out for the London Dungeons tourist attraction. I rest my case. In 6th place, we have an uncommon plague. I know, no one wants to hear about a plague ever again after recent history, but I promise this one isn't your typical version. The dancing plague of 1518, or the dance epidemic of 1518, was a case of dancing mania that occurred in what is now known as France from July until September of that year. The outbreak began when a woman by the name of Frau Tochofefa began to dance fervently in a street for a week straight. Soon, 3 dozen others joined in on the dancing chaos, with the plague claiming 400 victims by August. By early September, the outbreak began to subside, as the dancers were sent to a mountain shrine to pray for absolution. Guess we found where Footloose took inspiration. It is unsure just how many, but a small number of victims did pass from this epidemic, which is wild. Historical documents, including physicians' notes, cathedral sermons, local and religious chronicles, and even notes issued by the city council, are clear that the victims danced, but it is not known why. There are many theories behind the phenomenon, the most popular being stress-induced mass hysteria. Other theories include ergot, which I'll touch on in just a moment, and religious explanations. It would be interesting to see if this ever pops up again in modern times. Hey, look, sometimes a gal just wants a flash dance moment without judgment, okay? Okay, fine, maybe me. In 5th place, we've got bad bread. In today's modern age, if bread starts looking funky, we tend to just, eat around it or toss it, but people didn't always have that awareness. Ergot is a fungus blight that forms hallucinogenic drugs in bread. Its victims can appear bewitched when they're actually just higher than a kite. It thrives in a cold winter followed by a wet spring. The victims of this might suffer from paranoia and hallucinations, twitches and spasms, cardiovascular trouble, and stillborn births. Now, this also seriously weakens the immune system. Human poisoning due to the consumption of rye bread made from ergot-infected grain was common in Europe in the Dark Ages. The first mention of a plague of gangrenous ergotism in Europe comes from Germany in 857, and following this, France and Scandinavia experienced similar outbreaks. England is noticeably absent from the historical regions affected by this, as its main source of food was wheat, which is resistant to the fungi. In 944, a massive outbreak of ergotism caused 40,000 deaths in the regions of Aquitaine, Limousin, Périgord, and Angoumoise in France. Ergotism is actually believed to have played a large role in witch hunts, since the symptoms of this poisoning and the signs of bewitchment are almost identical. Witch hunts hardly occurred where people didn't eat rye. Just saying. In 4th place, we have the Younglings of Woolpit. Those no words have thwarted my vocabulary again. How'd you guess? The legend of the green younglings has been told time and time again, and I'm surprised today's research was the first I've learned about them. A brother and sister duo were found near... take a guess? Yep, the village of Woolpit in the 12th century. Dang, y'all are good at these guessing games. They spoke in an unknown language and looked relatively normal, minus the green color of their skin. After being rescued, they refused to consume anything for several days until presented with raw broad beans, and eventually learned to eat other foods. Shortly after being baptized, the brother passed away. Okay, slightly suspicious, but the gal adjusted to her new life, and was considered very wanton and impudent. Simply put, in modern English, she had a mind of her own and refused to be docile. Atta girl! After she learned to speak English, the girl explained that she and her brother had come from a land where the sun never shined, everything was green, and the light was like twilight. I'm guessing they were living in some sort of forested environment, but maybe they were aliens? Hey look, with all the research I do on alien life, you cannot blame a gal for jumping to that conclusion. In 3rd place, we have divorce by combat. Yep, people could get divorced, but it was a heck of a process. Divorce by combat appears to have been a form of trial by combat, which was when accusations were dealt with between two parties where there were no witnesses or a confession. Whoever won the duel was deemed to be right. The rules for divorce by combat as we know it come from Hans Tellhofer's Fechtbuch, which was written in 1467 and are as follows. The man would be placed in a waist-height 1 meter deep hole with one hand tied behind his back while the woman was allowed to move freely. Both parties wore practical clothes, which was described as a one-piece bodysuit with stirrup legs. The woman was armed with 3 rocks, each wrapped in a length of cloth to form a kind of swinging club. The man was given 3 normal clubs that matched the length of the woman's cloth to ensure that their ranges were equal. The man was not allowed to leave that hole, by the way. To further limit him, if he touched the edge of his hole with either his hand or his arm, he had to surrender one of his clubs. If the woman attacked him while he was surrendering his club, she in turn forfeited one of her rocks. Yes, the rules place the man at a clear disadvantage, but it's important to remember that it is unlikely that the woman had any kind of combat training. Furthermore, in any kind of physical contest, it is likely that the male would have an advantage in size and strength. For that time period, not modern day. I watched WWE. Women can beat up men. So the handicaps placed upon the man were to try and make the fight as fair as possible. That's honestly pretty dang impressive for the time period. The conditions for victory are unclear. Some historians believed it was unlikely that fights were to the death. Instead, it was probably down to the judges to decide when one of the fighters had been incapacitated. Since both parties were hitting each other with big blunt objects, it seems likely that many trials ended with one party being knocked unconscious. Thankfully, divorces are mostly, a lot less lethal today. Look, I said mostly. In second place, we have methods of obtaining information. Nowadays, if one is in court and receives a sentence of any kind, it's usually, being detained to a prison or institution, charged a financial amount, or community service. But courts weren't always humane. Heck, this could probably make like a decent top 10 on its own, but I'll try to condense it today. As the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle for 1139 put it, courts hanged them by their thumbs, or by the head, and hung fires on their feet. They put knotted strings about their heads and writhed them so that it went to the brain. Sometimes they put in a chest that was short and narrow and shallow, and put sharp stones therein, and pressed the man therein. I neither can nor may tell all the wounds or all the tortures which they inflicted on the wretched men in this land. Pressure devices from that time period can be classified in many ways, but I've managed to narrow it down somewhat. If they leave a mark or not, if they draw bodily fluid or not, physical versus psychological anguish, and if it was used to extract information or as an additional punishment to prolong death. During my research, I read up on over 50 different versions of heinous punishment, half of which include words I definitely can't say, and others that would send me retching if I tried to describe them here. You want me to try? Oh, okay. It's on y'all's conscience, so if anything happens to me. A cheap and popular way to end someone slowly was by forcing a rat through a victim's body as a way to escape a cage that they had been put in. Since y'all need detail so much, the rat was caged, not the human. Unless stopped almost immediately, this torture always resulted in eventual death. Once again, I could go on for hours if y'all really want me to, but I'm suddenly a little queasy and I'd like to keep my food in my stomach if you don't mind. In first place, we have people munching in ancient Egypt and Europe. Yeah, remember that list of no-no words? Yeah, here we go again. The question in old society was not should one consume human flesh, but how and what kind of flesh did you want to consume? Grave robbers were making bank, but sadly, no one was selling zydrate in a little glass vial. The answer at first was Egyptian mummy, which was crumbled up to stop internal red fluid release. Skull was one common ingredient, taken in powdered form to cure head ailments. One popular drink to cure apoplexy mixed powdered human skull and chocolate, while the most coveted remedy mixed skull with alcohol. Even the toupee of moss that grew over a buried skull, called usnea, became a prized additive, its powder believed to cure nosebleeds and possibly epilepsy. Human fat was used to treat the outside of the body. Red human fluid was procured as fresh as possible, while it was still thought to contain the vitality of the body. One physician even recommended drinking it fresh from a living donor. No, he was not accused of being a vampire. Shocking, I know. The poor, who couldn't always afford the processed compound sold in apothecaries, could gain the benefits by standing at executions, paying a small amount for a cup of the still warm life source of the condemned. Thanks. For those who prefer their redness cooked, a 1679 recipe from a France apothecary describes how to make it into marmalade. While I do fancy myself an amateur baker, I'll stick to my famed double chocolate cookies and mini egg dip. And now that my lunch is threatening to make a run for it, that's the end of today's top 10. If I start turning green, I guess I'll just blend into the scenery? Be sure to let me know in the comments if I left out anything major, if I should start adding more yellow to my wardrobe for the next time I pop up here, and as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more from us here at Bumblebee.